Today, I'm really excited to have Vijay Koduri on the podcast. Vijay is the co-founder and CEO of Sizzle.gg, an AI platform for gaming and esports highlights. He was formerly the SVP of marketing for Adyen and the head of marketing for Google Wallet and Offers. And he has an MBA from the University of Michigan and a BS in electrical engineering from the University of Illinois. It was really great to talk to Vijay because he's been in the industry for a long time, both in startups and in big tech. And so it's been great to see the journey from both perspectives and see the way that he has seen AI transform in the last couple of years and how he's jumped from different fields, whether it be from fintech or into gaming now, the way he approaches that and the way he's gone about it. So with that said, I hope you enjoy the podcast. Hey Vijay, and welcome to the podcast.
Hey, Divik. Hey, great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, super excited to have you on and talk about the work you're doing at Sizzle and your previous work at Adyen and Google. But before we get started, I always love to find out the journey that brought you into tech and entrepreneurship. So, what was that journey for you? What brought you here?
Wow, that's like a lifelong question. Um, so I finished college in the 90s, and right when I was finishing college, the internet started to happen. In
Yeah.
fact, when I was graduating from University of Illinois, my junior or senior year, that's when the world's first browser, like web-based browser, Mosaic, came out. Mark Andreessen, he went to University of Illinois. He and the team launched it there, and a bunch of us started using it. And my first job was at Anderson Consulting, which is now Accenture. And the my manager was one day asked me, "Hey, do you know anything about this internet? Do you know how to use Mosaic?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I've been using it at college." He's like, "That's awesome because we don't know how to find anything on this thing. So can you be like the Mosaic guy?" And so I quickly became there was literally one computer connected to the internet.
Right.
And I was like, that was next to me. And anytime someone needed anything on the internet, I was like finding it. And funny enough, like there was no Google back then. There was not even Yahoo had launched. And so you had to know what you were doing. And so I totally got into this internet business. And one day my boss was like, "Hey, do you want to write a white paper on this since you're totally into it?" And I'm like, "Sure." So I wrote a white paper. First half was a little technical, what's HTML and stuff like that. And the second half was all business. It was like, what are the business uses of the World Wide Web?
Mm,
And I was like, this was like 94, 95. And I'm like, someday people are going to be buying plane tickets on this thing. Someday people are going to trade stocks on this thing. And
yeah.
it all happened. So within a year or two, it all happened, right? Everything
Right.
was so fast back then. And so I was getting frustrated by the pace at Anderson Consulting was moving because they were working on this like boring client server stuff and like all the fun stuff was happening with the internet. So one fine day I'm like, I'm quitting. I'm done with this.
Right.
And me and a couple of buddies, we started our own internet company. We couldn't decide on what to do. We were like, we got to do something with the internet. We couldn't decide what
Right.
to do. So we decided that people need web servers. So we literally set up like two web servers in my parents' basement in Chicago. And one was our production server and one was our backup server.
Right.
And you wouldn't believe this, but our initial version when we launched this site, it was called Charlotte's Web Space. It was connected to a 56.6 modem. Like it wasn't even a high speed line. And we just, we got our website up. We said we're in business if anyone needs web space. And, eventually we got actually quite a few. We had a few hundred small businesses running on our server. And we upgraded to a high speed 128K ISDN line at some point. But one day there was a huge storm, like hopefully everyone from Helene and Milton are doing okay, but there was a storm in my neck of the woods, and the water came crashing through this window well right onto our servers in my
Oh
parents'
man.
basement. And like that was pretty much the beginning of the end of that business. Like we ran it for maybe a year and a half.
Right.
But it was a fun experience. And I think your question was, how did you get involved in startup stuff? That was like my first flavor of startup. And I loved it. I loved the highs. Like literally, the first order form we got for web space on our servers was on a fax machine because,
Mm,
at that time you still couldn't accept credit cards online. So we could sell space, but we had to accept like the order form with the credit card number on a fax machine. I mean, it was
right.
insane. But when that fax first came in, I was like, "Oh my god, we built something that someone is willing to pay for. This is unbelievable, right?"
Right.
So that was kind of a high that after that, I was very confused in college what the hell I wanted to do. But after that, I'm like, okay, I want to do this internet stuff. And so I came out to the valley after that and worked briefly at a startup out here on the payment side. We actually built a digital wallet. And then somehow I got into MBA school and I went there. And it took me after that, got married, and took me and my wife a while to be able to move out here again. But the
Mhm.
idea to moving out here was I always had in the back of my mind, I want to be in tech. I want to do a tech startup. I want to be in Silicon Valley. So the
Yeah.
whole thing just took a while, but like I've always had this notion of wanting to do my own thing.
Awesome. Well, very, very interesting. And I see a lot of I think whenever I talk to people who were part of like the dot-com bubble or the early days of the internet, there's actually a lot of similarities I feel like with the current AI, cycle that we're in, and it's history really repeats itself. So the same thing, a couple of years ago, people in AI for a lot of different companies, they were like, oh, we've heard about AI. I think we should start researching into it. Just look into what we can do. Maybe you can do some predictive analytics or something. But a lot of executives actually saw it as a black hole that you're just going to throw a bunch of money into just to say we have AI, but they didn't actually, really paid that much attention. But fast forward,
Totally.
even from like 2019 to 2022, in 3 years, and everybody's going fully into AI.
Yeah.
Um, same, I feel like the same thing with the internet. Like the internet started with like, hey, there's this thing that's popping up. Take
Right.
a look. Like your time at Anderson Consulting or now Accenture, right? And
Yeah.
and then in the span of 3 years, it's like, oh no, 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 this is big. We need to really invest in this, right?
Totally. Everything just changed. Yeah.
And so it's always really interesting to hear those stories. And then a lot of the infrastructure that we take for granted, that AWS, I can spin up a server that I can run thousands and thousands, maybe millions of requests on in the span of
Yeah.
15 minutes. But back in the day,
Yeah.
even like 10, 15 years ago, you had to actually mount a server rack in wherever and have a physical space to do that. I think people really don't understand how commoditized the infrastructure has been. So it's very,
It,
very cool
it,
to hear those stories.
yeah. It's unbelievable because we literally had the one of the earliest versions of Linux. We had the very first version of Apache web server that we
Right.
installed then. So it was like super, and it took several weeks to get the whole infrastructure up and running. Right? It's not like 10 seconds on AWS. So yeah,
Yeah, no, super, super interesting. And you started off, it first a big company actually, then you went into startups, then you eventually made your move into the valley, and you still worked with some bigger companies, did your MBA. So you've had a various amount of experiences both in
sure.
startups and in big companies. And so I'm just curious, like, how have you made the decision in terms of what to pursue next? Like, how do you know, hey, I want to go back into startups, or hey, it's my time to maybe go back into the big companies?
Yeah, I mean, I think life defines a lot of that for you.
Mm,
So when my wife and I were finally ready to move out to the valley, it was 2007 timeframe, and I was like, well, I do want to do a startup, but I don't know anyone in Silicon Valley. I need to establish a network first. So
right.
maybe I'll join a startup first. That was my thinking. Work there for 2 or 3 years, and then find people and I can do something on my own. And so I had applied for jobs, and mostly it was like looking at, okay, who do I know that's out there, either personally or maybe through my network. Like I did University of Illinois undergrad, I did Michigan for my MBA. So what are my alumni networks doing, and who can I tap? So I tapped a bunch of people, and maybe there was a dozen startups that I was looking at, and then there was this VP at Google that was a Michigan alum. I sent him a cold email, and a week later, I got a note from one of his reports saying, hey, we saw your resume and I have this position at Google. And so I was like, okay, let me just interview, see what happens. And one thing led to another. And I got the job at Google. And even though I was thinking, okay, let's do startups, I was like, maybe Google's not a bad place to build a network. So,
Yeah.
there's a lot of smart people there. So let me join them for 2, 3 years and then I can do my own thing. So I joined Google, and when you move out here, life isn't easy. The finances are hard, mortgages are tough. We bought a
Yeah.
home within our first year here, and then you have this crazy high mortgage, and then it's really hard to leave that Google job and
Right.
jump on your own. So that took some time. So I was ended up at Google for about 7 years before I was sort of ready to do even something, even forget about my own startup, but something a little bit more entrepreneurial. It just took a while. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, that's as I'm getting a little bit older, I think that's something that's been on top of mine too, where it's like, I'm in the startup journey right now, still trying to make things work and see what happens. But it's always this trade off because there's this like normal life that's going on, and then the startup
Yeah.
life, and normal life sort of
Yeah.
gets paused, right? But how long can you really pause it for until you're like, okay, I think I need to really start thinking about those lines, like getting a house or getting married or settling down a little bit.
Yeah.
Like all those different areas really start to pop up. So I totally understand where you're coming from already.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's two natural times, right? One natural time is sort of post college, pre marriage, pre house, pre kids, like no real commitments there. That's a great time to do it. And the other time is like your 30s, if, I'm just talking traditional timelines here, but
Hmm.
whether it's 30s or 40s, whenever you're sort of married, young kids, you've got the mortgage, it's like really, really hard to do it. So
Yeah.
maybe when your kids are a little older, you've maybe paid down the house some more and you're financially a little bit better off. That's another good time to do it. So at least in my life, that's how it worked out. I was able to do some stuff in my 20s and able to do some stuff in my 40s, but not really in my 30s.
Right. Well, checks out for me. That makes complete sense. But you mentioned your position at Google, which I think is very interesting. I think being in the valley itself, there's always so much. Like it's really hard to explain for people who aren't here, but there's just
Yeah.
so much serendipity of being here, and so many opportunities just pop out of nowhere that you never really accounted for. So if you tell people who are sitting outside, it's very hard for them to really understand that network effect until they're here. But
Yeah. Yeah.
you started at Google and you were there for a while. And I know then eventually you ended up joining Adyen,
Yeah.
which I think still people don't know what Adyen is, but
Sure.
they really
Sure.
should. I mean, it's a massive
Yeah.
company, and a lot of your payments that you're doing today are on their infrastructure. So for people don't know, Adyen is essentially a global payment company that allows businesses to accept e-commerce, mobile, and point of sale payments. And so, I guess like you're working at Google, you were there for 7 years. What made you join Adyen after your time at Google, and what was that? What was the motivation there?
Yeah, I mean, so my last 3, 4 years at Google, I was on Google Pay, Google Wallet at the time,
Hmm.
and I literally was on the original founding team of this. I was on the marketing side. I was the first marketer on it. There was literally about maybe 6 people, mostly engineers and a product manager, and the executive on it when I joined. But it was a super fun team because we just knew we wanted to build an e-wallet, and I helped sort of define, talk to users, like what do you want in an e-wallet, and we built all that. We launched it, and the day of the launch, we did this press conference in New York City that I organized, and we had this demo where, for the first time, when you tapped a phone on the credit card reader, three things happened. The payment went through, the coupons went, your coupon got redeemed. And if you had a loyalty card, we literally had Macy's, I think, and Subway and a couple of other merchants, and we set up a proper thing on stage. And it was a super cool moment, like just like first time ever in the world, three things happening with one tap. And we had, the small team at Google had set it up. So super exciting. We were kind of at the forefront of this new sort of digital payments revolution. And that was in 2011 when we did that. And I was
Right.
there at Google till about 2014, kind of helping grow Google Wallet both online and offline. And so in that process, I was deep in the payments world. And
Hmm.
by 2014, Google was a bona fide big company. Like when I joined, it was maybe 10,000 people in 2007, and when I left in 2014, I think it was about 50,000 people. So, I'm more like I wanted to do startup stuff. This is a really big company for me. So I was ready to move on, but I didn't want to lose that payments sort of knowledge and expertise that I had built up. And so I was looking for places to join, and there was actually a lot of good startups in 2014. Kind of,
Right.
as things were kind of at a peak. I think Instacart was getting started. Like there was a lot of good opportunities. But then, a recruiter had pinged me from this company, Adyen. And even though I was in payments, like you're saying you hadn't heard of it, I hadn't heard of it in 2014. And
Yeah.
I'm like, who is this? And, we had talked to a company called Braintree, and, Stripe, and, this new space was emerging. And turns out, well, Adyen was in that similar space in Europe. So they hadn't really penetrated North America yet. And
Mm.
so we hadn't heard about them over here. But the more I researched them, I was like, oh my God, this is a hugely needed space, a hugely growing space. Because most of the credit card processors like Chase and all these old school companies, they were designed decades ago to process physical world payments. And there was no like specialty companies only doing online payments. There were some in the 90s, kind of old school Web 1.0 stuff. But as we got to Web 2.0, you know, not Web 3, but 2.0, 2.0 plus,
Yeah.
um, you needed new technology. And Stripe and Braintree and Adyen were kind of the list. That was pretty much it. And so seemed like a great opportunity to join them. Heading up North America marketing, they had just signed up Facebook, and they were looking to sign up a bunch more companies out here. So I just thought it was a really cool opportunity, and actually had a lot of fun when I was there. So it worked out really well.
Yeah. Yeah. Seems like you've been at the right place at the right time already, and we haven't even got to Sizzle yet. So
Yeah. Yeah,
that's
no, it was fun. Like, because there was maybe I went from a 50,000 person company to I think Adyen was maybe about 200 people at the time,
right.
but in North America, it was only about 15 people.
Right.
So, and I was the only one in marketing, so I got to build a team here and kind of help grow the company and help get them new clients, and just a lot of growth. So it was a lot of fun.
And I think one of the things that I feel like engineers don't appreciate enough is like the technology of the company is one thing, but marketing, branding, and community building are a whole different set of items that a company can like. You can have whatever technology you want, but if you don't have those feats set out, it doesn't matter. And
Yeah.
so especially in certain fields, like I think especially in the fintech field, there's this trust based approach that you have to take in fintech. And some, of course, you mentioned Web3 in the middle. They had their little crisis with that trust based approach, but in general, like when you're talking about early stage startups, and then they're handling your payments, or or you're just giving money and facilitating payments, that can always be a little bit worrisome for potential customers. So especially on the marketing side, that must have been a big thought process there. So how did you approach building trust with potential customers, and basically creating your marketing there?
Yeah, I mean that's the $1 million question, right? Like, how
Mm.
do you build trust? Why is this unknown company worthy of my business and worthy not just of me giving money, but my payments that my customers are paying me online? Why should Adyen be the company processing those payments? So the only way to build trust, in my mind, is well to prove yourself. But how do you even get that chance the first time, right? Before you can even prove yourself. So the best way is when someone that both of you know, like a mutual friend. Like in dating, there's all sorts of dating sites where mutual friends make introductions, right?
Yeah.
I'm in the startup world now. Like a VC, if I cold email a VC, they won't care, right? They won't open it. But if I go through you or a friend, and you put in a warm referral, then hey, that VC will take the meeting.
Yeah.
So having a mutual friend sort of vouch for you, I think, is the key to at least getting that initial shot, and then proving yourself is how you build trust. So our whole strategy at Adyen was we had just signed Facebook,
Mm.
and we had bunch of great customers in Europe, like Booking.com, and I think we had signed Spotify at the time. I can't remember the exact timeline, but there was these great brands in Europe, and Facebook was our first really big one in America. And we were like, how can we leverage these companies that have not only took a risk on us, but we're doing great work for, vouch for us? So my whole strategy was to set up events where it was like, we called it payments best practices or tips of the trade or things like that. But, people from Facebook were the speakers, or Spotify or
Mm,
booking.com. And they would talk about, best practices in general. And maybe 25% of what they talked about was their stuff that they did with Adyen.
right.
So they snuck us in, but, our whole thing was, like any B2B company, your strategy typically is land and expand. So the question is, where do you initially land? What's that hook that you get any big company to take a chance on you before you can expand? For Adyen, it was international payments. So in
Mm,
US, most of these companies had credit card processors that were doing just fine. But when you go internationally, when you go to Mexico or Brazil or Japan or Indonesia, wherever around the world, the payment methods are different.
right.
Like Brazil, they don't really use credit cards like we do in the U.S., right? And there's actually, at the time there were a lot of cash based systems. Like you literally go to a convenience store and you pay cash, and they say, "Oh, Divik has placed this Amazon.com order. He paid me the money. Amazon can now ship him." Right?
Yeah.
So there's different payment methods around the world. There's e-wallets, random, like Indonesia has a ton of e-wallets.
Yeah.
And if you're an e-commerce site and you don't integrate to one of those e-wallets, guess what? Like, you're not going to get paid that easily.
Yeah.
So Adyen's whole business was taking all these payment methods around the world. And when I was there, I think there was about 200 payment methods that were part of Adyen's system. Now it's, I'm sure, probably approaching, 1,000 or many hundreds. I don't know. I don't even know the number now. But our whole pitch was, hey, US, yeah, you have credit cards, but internationally, instead of plugging into these 10, 20, 30 payment methods, plug into Adyen once, and we handle all the complexity on the back end. And
Right.
guess what? All of a sudden, you can start accepting payments anywhere in the world. So I think, like Facebook, we had first gotten them in Southeast Asia. It's a pretty complicated market. And so when Facebook spoke at these events and they said, here's how we handle Southeast Asia, and we used Adyen, and here's kind of how easy they made it for us. Then all these other sort of companies, and some of them were really big companies like Google, Amazon, et cetera. Some of them were mid-sized companies. They're all going to, of course, listen to Facebook.
Yeah.
And then that's how we started to sign up more and more of these guys. And so initially we just had these among the big guys, and then it was kind of a closed club. But then the mid-sized companies want to be part of that club,
Yeah.
So just to like get the invite to some of these events, our sales guys would be like, "Hey, I heard on the street you're having an event. Can I get in on it?"
Yeah.
So you kind of indirectly put pressure on these guys, saying, "Hey, you want to be part of the club? You can, but let's figure out where we can start working with you." And so it's kind of a symbiotic thing. So I think that's community building is really, really key to any kind of marketing.
Yeah.
And I guess, yeah, I mean, that's how we did it.
No, that makes that well very, very interesting. And I think it's even more relevant nowadays as well. Like I think I actually have this whole theory that in the age of AI, community building already was very important. You have a story back, 2017, 2018 before the AI boom up on it. But I think it's
Yeah.
only going to become more and more important because as more content comes out, as more platform comes out, and as the infrastructure keeps getting more commoditized, these are going to be the differentiators for your product, right? And so it's very interesting how you leverage that customer relationship, the existing one you have with Facebook, to not only create your own brand presence out in the market, but essentially have them champion your product for them. And that's one of the
Hmm.
biggest things I think a lot of early stage startups, they end up realizing later on, but your initial set of customers are your best champions. They can do better than any sales team at a certain point if you do a really, really good job for them. So I like the way how you took that concept, but really leveraged it as well to make Adyen go forward, take Adyen one step forward. So Very, very interesting.
Yeah, and I think that that's how you get your initial customers. And then to really get the drumbeat going, you have to figure out, well, how can you get that as part of mass marketing,
Yeah.
right? So there's only so much one-on-one sales you can do. And at some point, you have to kind of do, especially when you start to get to the mid-sized companies and the smaller companies, you can't, approach them all one-on-one. And so the challenge with a lot of these big companies that we signed up was they didn't give us permission to use their name. Like we couldn't do an ad saying, "Oh, Facebook is using Adyen, you should too."
Yeah.
That would have been an awesome ad. I just couldn't do it. And so, my boss and I were like brainstorming one day. We're like, how can we get around this?
Yeah.
So we're like, and we had raised like a huge round. We'd raised like 250 million bucks. So we had the
Mhm.
money to do massive advertising. We just needed to figure out how. And then I came up with this thing about, well, maybe we can say X% of the top 10 companies are using Adyen,
Right.
and by the time we had gotten there, we had already signed up a few of these other top 10 internet companies. So I think we started off with 4 out of 10 or 5 out of 10 of the top 10 internet companies in the world are using Adyen, and we put like billboards on 101
Yeah.
behind that. And then I think we ran some variant of those ads for like a year, maybe 2 years. And by the end of the 2 year mark, we were literally at 9 out of 10 of the top 10 internet companies like using Adyen.
Right.
So it was pretty successful, even without mentioning any names. Everyone, the mid-sized companies knew that, hey, we're playing with all the big boys in the world.
Right, right, makes sense. And those 101 billboards are pretty legendary. Every time you cross
Right.
the 101, you're like, "Oh, these
Right.
guys are really going for it."
Right. Exactly. Exactly. So that was pretty
Uh,
cool.
Awesome, awesome. So, you talked about your background there, and basically you jumped into the financial world, with Google Wallet and then with Adyen, which it gets me very, very curious because it seems like you took a right turn because you went into gaming with Sizzle.gg, which is not in that spectrum at all. So I'm super curious to get what the motivation was, but just for our
Yeah.
audience to set the premise.
No, it makes no sense. It makes no sense of how I made that jump. The rationale was my co-founder in this business is my old buddy. We
Okay.
friends from college. We had started that internet company back, in college when my parents' basement with the
You
with
went full
the
circle.
full circle. So we've kept in touch since then,
Yeah.
and he's done different things. And he was in LA on the side doing video editing for independent movies and shorts.
Okay.
And so he called me up one day and he's like, video editing sucks, because he was actually doing it for all these movies and doing the audio and video editing.
Oh yeah.
He was in Premiere or Final Cut Pro, wherever the hell he was using super complicated stuff. And he's like, man, we got to simplify video editing. And we started talking and we're like, movie editors are going to use their own tools. So they're not going to change.
Yeah.
But when you look at who has massive needs for even making simple clips, it's like social media fans. They see hour-long YouTube videos, maybe they want to share a clip or they want to share something from YouTube onto TikTok or whatever it is. The space of you know clipping from long form to short form is where we thought the mass market was.
Right.
So we said, let's build something that solves that problem. And the challenge, even there, like when we started to make a YouTube clip, you'd have to download the hour-long YouTube video, however many gigabytes that is, and then
Yeah.
use some, even iMovie, maybe easier than Final Cut Pro, but it's not an easy piece of software to use.
Yeah.
And then you make a clip and then you re-upload it, like super painful. So we thought, let's make a simple web-based video editor where you just pull in the URL of the Twitch or YouTube video, you put in the timestamps, make a clip, and then you can share it. And the way we did it was we used timestamps back to the source video on Twitch and YouTube. So we weren't even generating a new file. We
Mm.
weren't even, there was no upload download. So it was super easy. And so we just kind of threw that out there. And we had gone through this accelerator at UC Berkeley, Skydeck Accelerator, and the advisors were like, "Hey, this is cool, but you guys should build AI on top of this," and that's how it got started. Like gaming was one of the biggest content categories,
Right.
and it just made sense that AI and gamers had already started to use our tool. So that made sense. So that's kind of how the transition happened. It wasn't like I was I was like, I need to leverage payments like I did from Google to Adyen, where I wanted to stay in payments. It was more like, hey, when you do your own thing, it's really important to have a good co-founder you trust.
Yeah.
And it was just we were friends. We had worked together before. We had actually done other projects as well, and so we trusted each other. And we were like, I was just like, this is a good opportunity to just have a good founding team. So that was more than it really didn't matter the space I was in as much because I figured we'll build a team to solve the problem.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you there. I'm like in the middle of Google and Adyen, somehow you also became a pro gamer.
No, so I wish I had become a pro gamer, but no, that never happened. Yeah.
Right, right. Okay, well, for the audience, just to give them a little bit of context on Sizzle.gg, Sizzle.gg is an AI driven platform that creates automatic and personalized highlights for esports leagues and streamers. So I know Vijay was alluding to that, but that's like the formal definition of what's going on, and now you sort of know the motivation. And it's really interesting how you're talking about. So you started off at Berkeley Skydeck. If you don't mind me asking, around what time was that where they asked you about AI in it?
Um, that was definitely pre-pandemic, so probably like 2018 timeframe. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a well that that's a because nowadays if an accelerator says put AI in it, it's like standard, right? Like that's the
Right.
that's the go-to. But back in the day, for them to say that is definitely very forward looking.
Yeah.
Because like I mentioned earlier in the podcast, right, at that point, AI was still sort of this voodoo magic for a lot of
Totally.
people.
Totally.
It was like a black hole. So I'm actually curious because there's been a lot of advancements in obviously in AI in the last couple of years, which makes generating clips a lot easier and the infrastructure a lot better. But doing this pre-pandemic is a whole different ordeal. So like I guess like you have to put AI in it. So I guess how did you guys go about that? How did you actually leverage that and how did you form your product?
Yeah, I mean, we had a lot of question marks in the beginning. So first of all, what are we building? Was the first question, and
Right.
we had to talk to a lot of streamers and a lot of fans. And gaming streamers are crazy. They stream for like 7, 8 hours at a time, right? And so you've got these massive, massive sessions. So that's why it's sort of a big problem. Like you look at sports, NFL, for instance, there's 16 games in a week, maybe 17. They're 3 hours each. You're talking
Yeah.
about roughly 50 hours of content in a week. One gaming streamer generates 50 hours of content in a week, like if they're full time, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
they typically go 8 hours a day, 6 days a week. It's really hard for them to take time off. So, and there's millions of gaming streamers. So the amount of content generated in gaming is just astronomical.
100%.
And so these guys don't have the time after 8 hours to go back and edit something for another 8 hours, right? They have to engage with their audience. They have their own lives. They have other things to do. And the fans also, like most people that watch Twitch, it's not like you're watching, for 8 hours straight. It's like you're doing other things and Twitch is on the side. And whenever it gets loud or you hear some excitement, you kind of turn over and see what's happening. So
Yeah.
the fans also just want to watch the best moments. And so both sides were telling us they needed highlights. So we were like, okay, let's build highlights. Now, the challenge is some of these highlights can be funny moments, but some of them are actual game moments. So,
Yeah.
if there's a pentakill in League or if there's, right, a victory in Fortnite, whatever it is, our AI has to capture all of these moments.
Yeah.
So we first set out we said from the very beginning, our approach hasn't changed in the sense that we know we want to analyze the video, the audio, and the chat. The
Hmm.
video would always tell us game by game what events are happening. And so we needed different models to figure that out, right? So Like in FIFA, we have to track the ball, figure out where's the goalpost. Is the ball inside the goalpost?
Yeah.
In a shooter game, when is a battle going on? When are they shooting? When do they get kills? So all these sort of detections are different, and they require slightly different models from movement to animation to a lot of notifications on screen as well. So we built what's called OCR, optical character recognition engines, to read all of this on screen. And most of the OCR engines were like scanning insurance forms or something, taking, like black text on white paper and making them digital. And none of those worked well for gaming. So we had to
Yep.
build our own, where there's a lot of movement, there's fade in, fade out, different colors. So we got our system working really reliably, and all of this is pre like ChatGPT, right?
Yeah.
And so it took us a while to build all of these base models, and then each game then requires some collection, some subset of all the models that we use, and that's just on the video side. The audio and chat are actually much more universal.
Hmm.
So the audio, we're trying to do sentiment analysis on the streamer. So we're capturing, when are they shouting or laughing, or what's their speech emotion. We
Right.
also do sentiment analysis on the face as well if they have a face cam, but the audio tells us a lot there. And then the chat sentiment analysis on what's the users, right? So when are they excited, and gamer language is almost impossible to decipher, but
Yeah.
we do our best. And the emotes and the emojis also tell us a lot of what the user is thinking. And so if the streamer cracks a joke and the audience is laughing, we know it's a funny moment. And the streamer's laughing. If there's like a multi kill and the streamer shouting and the chat's going crazy, we know that's also a good moment. So
Yeah.
it's things like that when we get multiple signals. So we had started, I think by the time we raised funding, it was 2019, 20. We had been doing it part-time, and then finally 2019, 2020, we started doing it full-time. We
Right.
raised some money, we got a team, and then we started approaching game by game, and let's do this. So, in all honesty, like that approach worked even before ChatGPT, and a lot of the newer AI is great, but
Yeah.
it's also expensive. So we do a combination of everything now, but we still use, not that we're using 2019 models, but we've obviously kept up with the times. But we're using sort of non LLM, non what we call a vision language models for a big chunk of our work, and for some of our work we use the newer stuff. So it's all a combination now.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. It's funny how you. First of all, that must have been a magical experience back before pandemic. I mean,
Sure.
even in 2021, I remember I was doing a hackathon at the time, and we were doing ChatGPT to do some summarization on notes, but not ChatGPT actually. This was just GPT, the API. So at this
Oh,
point,
sure,
very
sure.
few people actually knew about OpenAI. And when we debuted this at the hackathon, everybody was going crazy. Like, how did you guys do this? This, that, this, that. So like those magical moments of AI, I feel like are starting to become a little bit more common now. But
Yeah,
I can imagine back in 2019, 2020, when you showed, these highlights to these gamers, they must have been going crazy. How
yeah.
did you do it this
They're like,
quickly,
How'd you do this? Yeah, how is this automatic?" Like they didn't get it. So
Yeah.
now there's more understanding of this, what AI can do. But back then, sure, no one, everyone was like shocked.
100%, 100%. And I think what's really great is that you built these foundational models from the ground up to for these use cases. And so yes, nowadays you can use ChatGPT and some other LLMs and other models to help you with it. But the nice thing is because you already have the foundation created, you could always keep integrating new technologies as you guys see fit. But you already have this base level foundation to build on, rather than just trying to sideload something just to see if it can work for this use case, which I guess gives you guys a great advantage.
Yeah, it does. I mean, cost is a factor too. So
Yeah.
in our case, we are processing thousands of hours of video every day. That's not cheap. You need a lot of GPU to do that. And there's a lot of startups out there that will just basically have an API to ChatGPT and, have a thin layer above that. And even Y Combinator invested in a ton of these startups.
Yeah.
Our philosophy is, even, yeah, sure, we could do that and we'll get okay results, but it would be super expensive to do that. And we can't, gaming streamers, it's not like they're rolling in money. They can't pay us a ton of money. So
Yeah.
we have to figure out a way to deliver great value on the cheap. So that's where, a lot of the traditional AI comes into play as well, and where that kind of hits its limitations, the newer AI comes in. But cost is a huge factor.
Yeah, well, I can relate to those streamers because unless you're tech podcasters also are like that, unless you're Lex Friedman or
Sure,
or some of the other big
sure,
ones. So
yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. And so yeah, I think what's also really interesting with the approach you guys have is not only on the technology side, but the work you guys are doing with esports leagues like PUBG Esports America. And like we mentioned before, these partnerships, community is going to be so central to companies coming up. So how have you guys been navigating those partnerships with game publishers and leagues? And I think based on our conversation, it seems to be completely up your alley. But I guess it's still a little bit of a shift from the finance and those B2B companies
yeah,
to these type of
yeah.
publishers.
Yeah, I mean, when you've done sort of B2B marketing and B2B sales, like at some point, yes, you have to make new contacts in a new industry, but the process is kind of similar. But yeah, I mean, with PUBG, for instance, they have this hugely popular game that's played around the world by probably hundreds of millions of people. And what's different in the gaming world versus, say, the sports world is typically the publishers behind huge AAA titles are the same ones organizing the pro league for that game.
Mm,
Right? It's not like NFL owns the game of football; they just run the league.
right,
But in the case of PUBG, well, they own the game, they publish the game, and they run the league,
right,
right? Like Riot, for instance, runs right now the League of Legends World Championships is going on. That's
right.
Riot's big event. That gets like 200 million viewers, bigger than the Super Bowl. That happens over the course of 4 weeks. But Riot runs that event. So the advantage in the gaming and esports world is when you can get relationships with the publishers, you typically can also talk to them about, hey, let me process highlights for your league.
Right.
And so for PUBG, for instance, there's multiple seasons that happen in a year, multiple regions, and there's all these teams and tournaments, and the tournaments can last over the course of a few weeks, and there's could be hundreds of games that take place in that time, and so it's not just a question of processing highlights for each game. They do have a manual video editing team that does that, but it's making sense of all this and being able to dynamically do highlights. Like they want to do, for instance, there's a team called Team Sonics, and Tiggleton is like, one of the top players in PUBG, and a lot of people want to see Tiggleton highlights. So can you get his highlights not from just one match, but multiple matches or multiple tournaments even, and
Yeah.
assemble dynamic highlights. So we built a portal for them that can basically, you can filter by team, by player, by match, tournament, whatever, or even type of play. Like you want to see, the multi kills, or you want to see, the funny moments, or whatever it is. You can filter by the types of play, and we'll assemble a dynamic highlight reel. So it saves the video editing team not only like the time to find all those raw clips, but also the time to assemble them. And they
Yeah.
can spend their time on the polish and all of that, but just getting all those raw clips together, AI is just much faster and it's much easier with it.
Oh, 100%. And I think, the other two factors there is like speed and quantity are also a big factor. Like you can spend a lot of time on one clip, but a lot of times you want these highlights to go out very, very soon after they happen.
Totally. Totally.
Um, and like you mentioned, some people might want to see Tingleton. People might want to see some other player. I have no idea, by
Sure.
the way, but
No,
who
no
these teams
worries.
are. But you
Wouldn't
know,
expect to. Yeah.
but like some people want to see certain players and certain teams, and so you need
Yeah.
not only the highlights going out, but all those reels going out as well. So
Yeah.
something that makes it much more efficient is very beneficial for the league in both
Yeah.
promoting it and getting the content to the players who care about it a lot.
Yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. And so yeah, no, that's very very cool. I'm excited to see where Sizzle.gg goes. I know you actually also recently raised a $5 million seed round led by
Yeah.
White Star Capital. So like I know you probably can't reveal everything what's going on in the books,
No,
but like
that's
what do you
cool.
plan to use this funding for? Like what's the next step for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much opportunity. There's so many sort of untapped spaces. We see a lot of growth in not just esports tournaments, but more casual tournaments. Like people just play all these tournaments, and they need highlights from those tournaments.
Yeah.
And we're starting to just get into that. We're seeing a lot of growth in Discord. And we see opportunities in lots of communities in Discord to crunch highlights there for them. So and then on top of these highlights, we're starting to work with brands as well.
Mhm.
At some point, when you're a consumery company, you have to dip your toes in advertising.
Yeah.
So, we're definitely doing that as well. And we have access to millions of PC gamers now. So it's a really, and there's a lot of brands targeting PC gamers.
Yeah.
Whether it's PC companies, custom PC companies, components, graphics cards, fans, et cetera, that go inside the PC, peripherals, mice, keyboards, et cetera, food and drink companies, even car companies, right? Everyone at some point, starts to view gamers as a potential market. And, we're seeing a lot of demand now from brands to say, hey, yes, I have all these other channels of getting at it, but we are a very direct way of accessing PC gamers.
Right.
So we're definitely building that up and building a team there. Uh, Definitely a lot of scope around the world. Streaming. When we started was huge in US and Europe, and you know. Around the world, mobile gaming is hugely popular. You go to LATAM and Asia and stuff, and a lot now you see a lot more of those guys streaming. You see a lot of streaming platforms in these countries. So there's just a lot of opportunities around the world.
Yeah, and I don't think gaming's getting any smaller anytime soon. So
No, there's something like 3.5 billion people play. Almost half of humanity play some form of video games, and that
yeah.
number, to your point, it's growing.
No, I'm really into basketball, and so what's really interesting is you have all these college and high school players who are posting mixtapes about them, in high school and just to drum a pipe, and it's going to be really interesting to see that in this space as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think for sure. Of course, there's some of that happening already, but I think with AI, is just going to take it to the next level. Like now, you have some YouTube channels like House of Highlights. They'll actually, basically make them those mixtapes you're talking about. But this there's this 99-1 rule in the creator world where like 1% of people create the content, 9% maybe do these remixes that you're talking about, and 90% just consume. But I think what's happening now with AI and with gaming especially is that anyone that's part of that 90% that was just consuming can also be a creator, especially when you think of people sharing stuff on TikTok, right? You just need 15 seconds of glory. You don't need like 8 hour streams, right? If you can just get those 15 seconds where you have this amazing moment and it happened to be recorded, and you can just share that out, all of a sudden you're a mini creator. So the amount of content is just unbelievable in terms of funny moments, cool compelling moments, what have you. And so like anyone can be that creator, anyone can be the mixtape person combining their own highlights with others. And so we're just trying to be in the middle of that and facilitating like anyone to create these clips. Yeah.
Right, right, makes sense. Well, I'm super excited to see where things go, and
Yeah,
definitely stay in touch to stay see where
for,
the journey is. I have
for
two last
sure.
questions before I let you go.
Sure.
The first one is there a book that you recommend us checking out or reading?
Well, I think the book to me that's top of mind right now is called The Science of Selling.
Mhm.
And, even though I've done a lot of selling in my life, you're never good enough. You feel like you can always improve. And, as a founder, you're either doing one of two things. You're coding or you're selling. Like that's it. That's all you're doing. And selling can be, by the way, fundraising, right? Like a lot of my time I spent talking to investors, that is definitely a form of selling because you have to have a whole funnel of investors you reach out to, get the warm intros. have an X number of meetings, X number that go into due diligence, and finally you get the funding. So there's a very clear funnel there. And one of the things this book talks about is not only how you sort of approach your pitch, right? Before, a lot of people just go into a pitch meeting, whether it's an investor or a customer, and they just like, here's our product. What do you think? And that's it, right? But it's like, they talk about like sometimes, like when you go into a grocery store, and you go into that cereal aisle, 9 out of 10 times you just pick up the usual cereals that you always get,
Yeah.
right? Honey bunches of oats, or whatever, Cocoa Puffs, or whatever your kids like,
Right.
right? Um, but that 1 out of 10 times, maybe you pick up something new. Why did you pick up something new, right? So, why was the change, right? Why now? Why this time? And why not some other time? So it's that approach of asking why. When you do a pitch deck, I think they have sort of 6 whys. Why the change, right? Why now? Why your industry? Before you talk about your company, talk about your industry, then talk about your company, then talk about your product, and then finally, why should that company spend the money on you? So organizing your pitch from the customer standpoint and the broader macro standpoint before you get to your product and your pricing and your pitch, I think makes a lot of sense. And to that line, they have a lot of other great suggestions as well. So definitely, that's definitely a book I would recommend. But there's a ton of other books. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I gotta definitely check that out. I
Yeah.
think uh, I like to believe I'm doing a decent job, but you can never hurt from
You
learning.
can never hurt. And I'm telling you, you can never be. I think there's a lot of good salespeople. It's hard to be great.
Yeah.
And, even one thing they mention in the book, like that's counterintuitive, is you would think like someone that's extroverted, that's naturally salesy, makes a better salesperson. Well, it turns out Wharton did a study on this, and that's not true. That's just a common misconception. So it actually has nothing to do with extrovert or introvert. It's more like your approach of understanding and letting the customer talk, and understanding and properly following a process to get to closing. So that's much, much more important.
100%. Yeah, and I think a lot of, like you mentioned, there are a lot of people default like, oh, I'm an engineer. I can't learn how to do sales. Like sales
Right.
is, I don't have those principles or values. But what you start to learn, or at least I think what you start to learn is like, no, there's like a science and a structure, and like there's actually a set process you can learn. Granted, there's
Yeah.
more factors that maybe you can't account for, like you can in engineering. But it's not this black box that either you're born with natural selling ability or not. It's something you can definitely learn.
100%. I think that's true of anything in life. Like, when I was leaving Google, I just needed time off, before starting something new. And I took about 3, 4 months off. And literally on Mondays and Wednesdays, I would do drawing classes. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, painting classes. And so I started to draw and paint all sorts of stuff. And I realized that it's literally just you have to learn the basics on what you can. It has nothing to do with genes. It has nothing to do with, oh, this is in my blood, or I can't do it. It's literally just learning the techniques and applying them, and then practicing. That's all it is, like anything else in the world. So sales is no different. Some people call it an art, but the nice thing about this book, it's the science of selling. It's like, let's break it down into step by step that anyone can do. So I think it's important to approach anything that way.
Awesome. Well, I'll definitely check it out, and
Yeah.
I'll add it to my collection. I need as good of a bookshelf as you have in the background, so yeah, I got
Well,
it there.
yeah. No, you should see some of the people I know. It's like they have rooms and rooms of books. But yeah, I
Yeah,
need
well,
to. I
hopefully I actually read them because I have a lot of books, but I don't. It's more like collection at this point, so I got to actually get
I
in.
know. Same with all of us. I definitely want to read more than I do. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Vijay, for coming onto the podcast. And I know we went through a couple of technical difficulties to make this happen, but I'm glad we could actually finally do it. And to everyone listening, thank you so much for tuning in.
Yeah. I know. Thanks so much, Davik. It was absolute pleasure and chatting with you, and happy to keep the dialogue going. Love it. Thanks.